Often when I'm speaking to people about data analytics or data science, they're actually quite surprised that my background is not in that space. I'm not from a maths or a stats background or a computer science background. I'm actually from a psychology background. So in this video, I'm going to talk about how I went from or came from a psychology background and ended up in the data analytics and data science space. So interestingly, for my degree, I chose psychology, and I actually chose psychology. Even though I was okay at math, I didn't really enjoy it. I didn't see the application of it. But as soon as I started my psychology degree, in the first week of induction, I realized that half of my timetable was statistics and research methodology. But the interesting thing was that in psychology, the application of statistics is used to answer questions. So you design experiments, collect data, analyze that data with statistical techniques, and then you answer certain questions or hypotheses. So anyway, I enjoyed psychology quite a bit, so that's why I went on to do a master's and then eventually a PhD, and I specialized in health psychology. So for my PhD, I actually looked into factors that predicted why children have accidents. So I looked at multiple factors, from factors within the child, so for example their perception, their actual safe ability on safety tasks, to their environment, to what their parents thought about them, what their parents' perceptions were about them, the way their parents supervised them, so a multitude of factors. And I used things like neural network and path analysis to build this predictive model. So what I did first was model the behavior to understand theoretically how it would operate, and then predicted future sort of safety behavior of children. So that was my background. My background was in psychology. I have a PhD in psychology, and I used to lecture also in psychology. But when I finished my PhD, I realized even though I enjoyed lecturing, I didn't want to stay in that field. I wanted to move into a more applied field. So I worked for the NHS and local government. So I spent a few years in public sector, and I did sort of research and analysis. And what I would do is I would, first of all, actually I used to run research studies, so questionnaires, those kind of stuff, and gather data and analyze it. But eventually I found that, like the hospitals I worked in or with the local authority I worked with, they would collect data as part of an administration process. So for example, when you turn up at hospital or an A&E, or if you go to your housing department or you apply for a benefit, the data is collected in an administrative system. And I found that if I analyzed that administrative data, a lot of the questions that the organization had, I could answer from that administrative data. So I still saw myself as a researcher who did research and analysis, and that's what I did. Anyway, after a few years, I moved on to the private sector, and that's where I realized that the work that I was doing was actually the work of a data analyst. Now, I didn't know that at the time. I mean, that wasn't something that was familiar to me, or was something that was in my sort of a common language, I guess. I didn't know what a data analyst was. I was from an academic background, knew what researcher was. I knew that researchers did data analysis. I didn't realize there was an actual role that did data analytics. So anyway, so I moved to the private sector, and I eventually ended up at ITV, where I set up actually the analytics function. I also set up other functions like the CRM, the SEO, the digital marketing. I set all those functions up, but the core of what I did was the data analytics function, and that was everything from databases to the actual analytics. Now, when I was in these organizations, one of the things I realized was that my timing was really good, because when I moved from the public sector to the private sector, one of the things that was sort of very much in demand was people having the skills to build predictive models. Now, my PhD was all about building predictive models, and in fact I was using machine learning before, like machine learning was a popular term in the private sector. So I was actually deploying machine learning techniques. I mean, I just called them advanced statistical techniques, but things like neural network, path analysis, I was structural equation modeling. I was using that in my academic world way before it was sort of popular in the private sector. So anyway, so when I moved to companies like ITV, I was able to use that skill. And so when I moved on from ITV to organizations like Adam and Eve or Wonderman, having that skill set was really useful. Now, what happened was, as I moved to those organizations, I became more and more senior in my role, and therefore I didn't do much of the doing. But because I had the groundwork or the foundations of sort of data science and data analytics from my academic background, and also I'd worked in different organizations, I was able to manage people who were able to do these things. And so I knew exactly what my data analysts and data scientists were doing, because I understood the theory of it, and I'd also done some of the application of it. So as you can see, my journey into data analytics and data science at that stage was quite natural, because I was already doing it when I moved over to the public sector. I just didn't know it was called data analytics and data science. And then when I moved to the private sector, obviously it started off as data analytics. And then later on, when data science became popular, I realized that what I was doing was data science work. Then after Wonderman, I decided to start my own analytics consultancy. And I started one back then and then another one. And now my current one is called B Data Solutions. And why I set that up, I'll talk about it in a separate video. I manage data scientists, data analysts, data engineers, software engineers, and when they build these products, I know what they build. When they build data products, I know what they're building because I have a background, like I said, a grounding in it from my PhD. So as you can see, even though people find it quite surprising that my background's in psychology, that I moved into data science and data analytics, it's actually not that much of a leap. The transition for me was quite easy, mainly because a lot of what I did in psychology was statistical analysis. I'd learned really advanced statistical techniques in order to do my thesis for my PhD. So for me, it wasn't that big a leap, but I can see from other people's perspectives, studying psychology and then getting into data science. Now, one of the things that I should mention is that I would never have been the best programmer, never been the best statistician, but because I had the combination of skill sets and I also had the psychology knowledge, it sort of gave me an advantage in the work environment. And the psychology bit actually gave me a bit of advantage because when you analyze data, especially consumer or customer data, you're actually looking at their behavior. With my psychology background, I was able to apply theoretical frameworks to that data. So things like, understand why people behave the way they behave. So for example, you have theories of planned behavior, you have theories like health belief model that explain why people behave the way they behave. And I could use some of that framework into explaining why customers did X and Y, or why some customers did this and some customers did that. So that was really useful because then when you're explaining to senior management, you can rely on that psychological knowledge to explain it in a more human term about why people behave the way they do. So like I said, for me, the transition from psychology to data science, data analytics wasn't that big. It's just that people can't see the connection when I mentioned that I have a PhD in psychology. But as you can see, it was a natural transition for me, and the psychology actually was an advantage for me to stand out in the work environment. Well, thank you for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you now understand why I'm into data science and data analytics. Please do like and share the video, and thank you.